Democracy and Dictatorship, presented by Shkora. Simply clever.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Democracy and Dictatorship, and I'm Rohit Gandhi. The strength of a nation, and most certainly a democracy, lies with its children. To say that children are the future may seem like a cliche, but its truth and relevance cannot be denied. There are various international laws, all aimed at protecting children. Every country has its own set of laws. Yet, we've still not been able to fully eradicate the suffering faced by our children. Let's start by taking a look at the Americas, where one would think that child labor may not exist, but it does. The US is guilty of engaging minors in labor on farms and the tobacco industry. Here's our correspondent, Giles Gibson, with more on that situation in the Americas.
Child labour. It's a problem usually associated with developing countries. But even in one of the world's largest economies, children as young as 14 are still part of the workforce. Jimena is just 15 and works on a US tobacco farm. She says she's repeatedly exposed to toxic chemicals as she toils away in the fields.
Sometimes last year they sprayed beside us while we were working in tobacco fields, and that's when I got sick. When they spray, you can tell the chemical is very, 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 very strong. I couldn't work at all. I couldn't even stand. I was just laying in the bed.
The children face punishing 12-hour days in extreme heat. And according to Human Rights Watch, corporate America is profiting from child labor. HRW says these major brands buy tobacco from farms where children are working. Child labor hit the headlines recently when a think tank funded by Donald Trump's education secretary posted a blog online saying, "Let us not just teach our children to play hard and study well, shuffling them through a long line of hobbies and electives and educational activities. A long day's work and a load of sweat have plenty to teach as well." But for children like Hector, who's 16 and also works in the tobacco fields, the issue is simple. Despite his own experiences, he says he still has hope for a better future for his children.
I wouldn't want to know that they're out in the heat like I was. I would want them to have a better life.
Giles Gibson, WION, New Delhi.
South Asia is a labor-rich region. Despite that, millions of children there continue to work as child laborers. Even the best estimates only offer a glimpse of the larger problem of children in employment in these countries. WION's Manoj Keval Ramani explored the issues that result in the persistence of child labor across South Asia.
From the countryside to the streets of modern metropolitan cities, millions of children across South Asia can be seen toiling away on a daily basis. The International Labour Organization estimates that around 17 million children work as labourers across South Asia. Nearly 10.3 million of these are aged between 5 and 14. These numbers, however, only offer a glimpse of the problem and do not tell the full story. For instance, the ILO estimates that 3.4 million children aged between 10 and 17 work as laborers in Pakistan. data for children younger than 10 is not available. One of the reasons for that is the fact that the country has not conducted a national survey to assess the incidence of child labor in over 2 decades.
It is not employment in the family enterprises. It is what is help. A child can help the family or family enterprises. It is not employment. So it is help. That too help is after the school hours. And again the proviso is that it should not affect the education of the child. So child is going to the school.
Another aspect that the numbers mask is the fact that the classification of working children as child labor is not a statistical process, but a matter of law. For instance, in Nepal, the Child Labour Act prohibits employing children below 14 years of age in any kind of labor and children below 18 years of age in hazardous works. Nepal's Central Bureau of Statistics recently reported that 61.7% of children in the country aged between 5 and 14 are in school and not employed. 27.4% are in school and employed. 6.4% are not in school and not employed. And 4.5% are not in school and employed. Therefore, as per the definition of child labour in the country, its incidence is merely 4.5%. That number, however, doesn't account for the overwhelming number of children who work in the unorganized sector or with their families in sectors like agriculture. Neither does it reveal the impact that employment has on the education of these children. Across the border in India, a similar debate has been raging after the Child Labour Prohibition and Regulation Amendment Bill was cleared earlier this year. The new law prohibits employment for children below the age of 14, but permits them to work for their families and reduces the number of banned professions for adolescents. Across South Asia, governments must strengthen laws and policies and ensure their implementation in order to eradicate child labour. But beyond that, it is important to assess the impact that employment is having on children. For every child deserves an education and must also enjoy a right to leisure. Every child deserves a childhood. In New Delhi, this is Manoj Kevalramani, WION.
Economics, politics, social taboos, hunger, population size, the reasons are plenty, but they cannot become excuses. We cannot call ourselves the civilized world and still be okay with letting our children be used and abused. There are countless organizations and government programs aimed at bettering the situation. But there is so much more work left to be done. We're going to take a quick break now, but when we return, we'll be speaking with Kailash Satyarthi. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2014 for his work in combating the oppression of children and working towards giving them an education.
Democracy and Dictatorship, presented by Shkora. Simply clever.
Welcome back to Democracy and Dictatorship. We have with us in studio Mr. Kailash Satyarthi, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2014 for his efforts in helping reduce the suppression of children and advocating their right to an education. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Satyarthi.
Thank you, my pleasure.
We've worked together before on issues. Where are we today? There was a law that got passed which would prohibit children younger than 14 to be working.
It's good that we have made remarkable progress in India as well as globally in reducing the number of child laborers, in making good laws, but still we have serious problem. Globally speaking, we have 168 million children in full-time jobs. In India itself, the number has been reduced officially from 11.5 million to 5 million approximately. So there is progress made. But we have to think beyond the law, because it's a crime which has to be dealt by law. It's a social evil, so we need to generate more awareness and change the age-old mindset of communities and society. And then there is also a serious responsibility lies with the business sector. So it should be the combination of all these things.
You know, we've heard this a lot when we've gone out. People say that if our children don't work, we will not be able to feed our children. But the argument then is defeated by the idea that people are looking to hire just cheaper labor when they hire children. And there are a lot of people who are unemployed. How does that whole argument hold today? How are you able to convince people that they must hire adults rather than hire children?
Well, there are three things. One is, you can say, the macro issue. As I said, globally, 168 million children are in full-time jobs, and 210 million adults are jobless. And that makes a vicious circle. There was a study conducted in India some years ago, and also in Nigeria, Peru, Pakistan, in several countries, which has established that there is a parallel between child labor and the parental unemployment. So the parents remain poor because children are preferred being the cheapest source of labor, and that goes on. The second is the economic imperative in different way. Today we are living in the world of knowledge economy. We cannot think of getting rid of poverty of a person or a society or a country without an education. And child labor is the biggest impediment in receiving education, and then quality education. And the third is the moral imperative, that children have never been responsible for poverty. So why they should suffer because of that? They are never responsible for war. They are never responsible for any of those organized crimes happening in the society. But they are the worst sufferers. And that is unacceptable.
You know, I remember when we were doing the documentary with you in 2006, there were a lot of these children who were working in homes. And we had to take those children back to Jharkhand, and we traveled with them. What you'd realize, they were 12, 13-year-old girls, some of them even boys. And they were really suffering. They would not be able to even enjoy their childhood. Now, when parents make that argument that I don't have enough money, I want my children to work so that I can survive, how do we explain that to a society which does not understand how children need to be children for much longer?
So here is a need of very intense social awareness and awareness in the communities and among the parents, and that we have been doing, and we have seen the success in not only one or two but thousands of the villages in India and also in other countries, that if the parents understand the value in education, that is happening quite fast. Parents started valuing education against some sort of earning by sending their children to child labor. And also if the parents learn that this is hazardous for children, and once a child goes through any child labor or hazardous work, then the cost is much more bigger than what they earn through it. So awareness is very much needed for it, and we have been successful in doing it. So that is needed. Right. But also there is a strong need of social protection programs. In our country we have, for instance, Manrega. We have so many other schemes for the scheduled tribe and scheduled caste. Then we have incentives for children, including some stipends and the midday meal scheme. So if we try to coordinate these schemes and try to converge them for the benefit of children, I'm sure that the community and the poor parents will also understand. So we have to take care of that social aspect of it also.
Now, if you look at the laws in India, there are a lot more protective laws in place. But if you look at the region, for example, Bangladesh, we look at Nepal, there are tremendous challenges for those countries because the economies are not as well oiled, if I may say so. How does one get by in the rest of the region?
So let me tell that not only in these countries but also in India, the law against child labor is not a perfect law. There are loopholes in the laws itself in the whole South Asian region, but the enforcement of those laws is another big challenge. It's ironical that South India, which is the mother of cultures and civilizations and religions and so on, is also the mother of largest number of child slaves. The largest number of children are trafficked within South Asia and also from South Asia to other countries. We have the largest number of child laborers altogether in South Asia. So these are vital issues which our children are facing in South Asia.
There are tremendous challenges in the developing world. But if you look at the developed world, how come they seem to have such large issues in misusing children really?
Of course, many countries in the developed world made tremendous progress, but there are still child laborers working. I personally have gone to those situations in United States of America, particularly in the West Coast, where the children are working in extremely hazardous conditions. They are working in potato and tomato farms, they are plugging oranges and getting hurt. The children are dealing with chemicals as well as heavy machines and electricity. Sometimes the children are electrocuted. So this is happening in the West Coast of United States of America. I have come across child laborers in Italy. I have seen child laborers in Portugal. So in some countries the problem is still there, but of course other countries made good progress.
Let's take a short break now. When we come back, let's talk about Mr. Satyarthi's new initiative on what he's doing to combat child labor.
Democracy and Dictatorship, presented by Shkora. Simply clever.
Welcome back to the show. We've been talking with Mr. Kailash Satyarthi about the challenges of societies where children continue to work globally. Mr. Satyarthi, you're launching a brand new campaign now. It's called Laureates and Leaders for Children 2016. Tell us a bit about the campaign. What is it about?
Well, I said the very first day of the Nobel Peace Prize announcement that this is going to be the comma in my life, not the full stop. I have to carry it on. So the Laureates and Leaders for Children Summit is going to take place in India, and this is first time anywhere in the world when such a large number of Nobel laureates as well as the world leaders are coming together for the cause of the most marginalized and neglected children. And this is not just for child labor issue. We wanted to bring every aspect of violence against children, may it be the children facing problems in conflict areas and war zones, may it be the children who are suffering due to natural disasters, or may it be the children who are living and suffering in refugee camps, those who have lost their limbs and families and countries and reduced to rather a kind of subhuman. So we are covering all these aspects in the Laureates and Leaders Summit, and we wanted to come out with a strong will, because in spite of laws and constitutions, institutions of governance and faith, in spite of a wealthy, well-connected, fast world, the children still suffer, and we cannot allow it to continue that millions of children face violence. So the Laureates and Leaders for Children would be a moral platform to raise the strongest possible voice for children, which cannot be ignored by any government or any society or any corporate.
You raised a very good point. Now, a lot of the children today you see in refugee camps, they have no skill development, they have no education, they're having to just sit out. We'll have millions of children out there with nothing to have in hand as they go forward. What can be done for children like that?
Yeah, I have spent some time in refugee camps, both in Germany as well as in Turkey. So in Germany, the biggest problem with the children was the language problem. They are traumatized. There is an element of hope. But what I suggested to German authorities that you have to do some more efforts in socio-psychological counseling for these children, and then ensure education, ensure hope, ensure their repatriation, because most of the children and young people told me that they wanted to go back to their countries. But the countries like Syria, like some parts of Afghanistan, some parts of Iraq, they cannot easily go back. But at least there they should feel at home, and they should feel that one day they will return back home with more dignity and more confidence. So as in Turkey, for instance, a large number of children are joining in refugee camps, and that requires a lot of efforts for their education, for their well-being, because these children are being trafficked. In Germany, 9,000 children went missing last year. From Italy, 6,000 children went missing last year, those who were refugees. So that's a serious question, that where these children have disappeared.
Sure.
They were taken by some traffickers or by the organized criminal gangs or whosoever. But these children are also ending up in child slavery, child prostitution, and other kind of miseries.
What a challenge. You know, one of the issues we saw when you rescue children out of child labor, getting them back to a school, the transition of going back to an education so that then they can continue with their lives, is a very, very important milestone. How does one do that? How does one take a society and then turn it around?
I have been advocating very strongly for the last 36 years that child labor and illiteracy, or say the eradication of child labor and education, quality education for all children, are the two sides of the same coin. We cannot achieve without other. So it's very important that all the children, first of all, be educated so that they do not fall into the labor market. Secondly, those who are withdrawn or freed from those situations should be ensured good quality rehabilitation and education. So we have been doing it in India as well as in other countries through our own efforts, through our partners' efforts, but through the state efforts by way of having good schemes. And we do some follow-up of implementation of those schemes for education of survivors of trafficking and child labor.
Mr. Satyarthi, you've been doing great work all these years, and congratulations again for your Nobel laureate, and I'm sure your path ahead will have taken care of many more children.
Thank you.
The scourge of children becoming part of the workforce is going to continue to be a shame for nations and civilizations. Efforts to return childhood to these children has to be a priority for any society. Their rights will determine whether it's a democracy or a dictatorial regime, but nothing is absolute.
Democracy and Dictatorship, presented by Shkora. Simply clever.